Hello, I am Dr. Tuğba Günebak. I am a nutrition and diet specialist. Today, we will be looking at gastrointestinal diseases from the perspective of functional nutrition. The digestive system is a highly complex system extending from the mouth to the anus and is particularly closely related to nutrition. Perhaps the most related system, because as dietitians, we always say digestion begins in the mouth. That's because we actually start digestion with the digestive enzymes secreted from the salivary glands under our tongue, and we complete it with the excretory system. Therefore, topics such as which foods we choose here and whether we select foods suitable for our physiology come to the forefront. There is a saying by Hippocrates, it's very valuable. He says, all diseases begin in the gut. Unfortunately, those who have not managed to protect their gastrointestinal system or who do not know which eating habits they need to improve in order to enhance the health of their gastrointestinal system can face these kinds of problems. Now, when we look at it, we will of course discuss in much greater detail in our online course what we can do to protect the stomach and intestinal system. But here I especially want to emphasize that, as many recent studies have shown, the first and foremost factor is the microbiota. Maybe you already know this, or maybe you are hearing it for the first time. Our microbiota starts in the mouth. In other words, we have an oral microbiota, and this continues throughout the entire intestinal and stomach system. You might ask, what is the microbiota? I can describe the microbiota as a line of beneficial microorganisms that surround our body from the inside and outside, protecting us from external factors and from pathogens, that is, harmful microbes. Having a strong microbiota is the primary factor in having ideal conditions in terms of the gastrointestinal system. Secondly, our immune system, that is our immunity. Having an ideal immune system means staying away from environmental factors that would negatively stimulate the immune system. For example, stress. For example, environmental pollution. You might say, how am I supposed to avoid these? Yes, you may not be able to avoid them, but you can learn to manage them. We will discuss these in detail. At the same time, it is especially important for us to have a diet rich in functional foods that stand out in terms of stress management. Because when we look at it today, for example, I want to open a parenthesis and give an example about bacterial health problems related to the stomach and intestinal system. For instance, a friend of yours says, I have gastritis. At the root of gastritis, there is a viral infection called Helicobacter pylori. In that case, you need to eliminate the source of this virus from the body so that you can deal with this health problem. While many people look for various ways to treat gastritis, a functional nutritionist knows very well that the way to deal with it is to follow a stomach protective nutrition program that will minimize the activity of this virus called Helicobacter pylori and bring stomach acidity to ideal conditions, which will keep the person away from future stomach problems. Along with this, there are also intolerances. Now, when we look at it, one of the underlying factors of stomach and intestinal diseases is also intolerances. From time to time, I encounter the following situation. For example, a patient comes to my clinic and says, Doctor, can you do an intolerance test for me? I won't, I say. And there's no need. Why is there no need? Because intolerance is such a condition that it is temporary. We can describe it like this. For example, today you say, I think I have a sensitivity to certain foods. You said, of course, I also want to emphasize here that food allergy and food intolerance are different topics. Food allergy is a sensitive issue that lasts a lifetime. Food intolerance means that a person has developed a sensitivity to certain foods. If during that period your stress factors are high, if you are frequently exposed to environmental stress factors, or if you are in a poor eating cycle, your sensitivity to certain foods may have increased. In order to manage this when it occurs, one of the factors you should focus on is elimination diets, and another is adopting nutritional practices that protect the stomach and intestinal system. Along with this, changes in intestinal motility, that is, changes in bowel movement, are also important. Sometimes people say, my metabolism is slow. A person's slow metabolism means that their internal organ activity is slow. How can we increase internal organ activity? By increasing metabolic rate. We can achieve this by making the right food choices that positively affect the working pace of the stomach and intestines. An increase in intestinal motility protects us from chronic intestinal diseases. Did you know that in later years, the majority of colorectal cancer cases actually originate from a history of constipation, that is, a history of infrequent bowel movements at a younger age? Therefore, the best steps we can take to protect ourselves from constipation are, first, to eat a diet rich in fiber, which we will discuss here, drink enough water, and adopt an active lifestyle. Because there are many factors that can cause the slowing down of intestinal movements. One of these factors is that a person has made a habit of using laxatives, which are medications that speed up bowel movements. However, the best approach is to increase bowel movements naturally. And along with this, you might be surprised again. We dietitians ask our clients about their stools. Well, I will explain this in our face-to-face class. There is a scale called the Bristol Stool Scale, and on this scale, the shape, color, and texture of a person's excretion are important for us in identifying a disease, because the intestines are the most important gateway to the body. Therefore, if you protect your intestinal tract, you can imagine it as having a strong fortress wall guarding everything that enters your system. Along with this, of course, whether or not you have a genetic predisposition is also important. In all chronic diseases, including stomach and intestinal diseases, whether you have a genetic predisposition is significant. How would I know? You might ask. You may not know, but the most important point I want to emphasize here is this. We divide the subject into genetic and epigenetic factors. Genetic factors refer to the disease risks you carry due to the genes you inherit from your mother and father. Epigenetics, on the other hand, says this: if you maintain healthy eating habits, adopt the right lifestyle, and consume the right foods, you can keep the chronic diseases you carry in your genes from becoming a reality in your life. In other words, you can protect yourself by clearly integrating functional nutrition into your life. Along with this, another important factor is that you shape your eating habits in the most accurate way. What will we learn in this lesson? Stomach acidity. How will we increase it? Do we need to increase our stomach acidity? Under what conditions does our susceptibility increase? Our microbiota. How will we strengthen our microbiota? Which foods should we prioritize? How will we strengthen our gut-brain axis? Along with this, especially among intestinal diseases, how will we manage irritable bowel syndrome, also known as IBS, which is the most commonly encountered? Nowadays, at the forefront of dietary practices that are most frequently mentioned and that help manage irritable bowel syndrome is the FODMAP diet. So how will we implement the FODMAP diet? Which foods do we need to eliminate from our lives? In order to protect a person's stomach and intestinal health, we need to learn about their eating habits and take a good medical history. Because for us, there is no disease, only the patient. Within those eating habits, how the person cooks and prepares their food, which foods they consume together, whether they drink liquids with their meals, and if so, what type of liquid they consume, whether they get enough fiber, whether they have access to sufficient functional foods, and whether they follow the correct practices to enhance the effectiveness of the functional components in the food. For example, let's say we decided to have someone consume a food containing resistant starch in order to protect gut health. We want to serve pasta made from durum wheat flour, which we know contains resistant starch. But if we cook the pasta by draining the water instead of letting it absorb the water, we will lose the resistant starch, and therefore we won't be able to observe the effect we expect. Or, if we have decided to choose an anti-inflammatory food to strengthen a person's gut health and are considering adding tomatoes to their diet, and we want to benefit from the lycopene in tomatoes, but we are unaware that the lycopene content increases 8-fold when tomatoes are cooked, then we are unable to make use of this advantage we have. Or olive oil. We bought olive oil. We wanted to consume it because it is rich in oleic acid and has antioxidant properties. It is a strong source of vitamin E. But we took the olive oil home. We stored it in a place exposed to sunlight. We oxidized it. These are incorrect dietary practices. Or we decided to eat foods rich in iodine. As we learned from the supermarket, we bought iodized salt. We took the iodized salt home. We stored it in a glass salt shaker with the lid open. The iodine evaporated and disappeared. Therefore, we will discuss in detail what we can do regarding a person's food choices, eating habits, lifestyle, and how to effectively utilize the bioactive components they contain. When we learn about functional nutrition in gastrointestinal system diseases, that is, stomach and intestinal diseases, how will we protect stomach health? How can the stomach lining become stronger? Along with this, how will we strengthen our microbiota in order to manage the viral origins, the viral infections underlying some stomach diseases? How will we protect gallbladder health? How should someone who has had gallbladder surgery eat? How should someone whose gallbladder is currently damaged or has sludge or is experiencing gallbladder complications eat? Or how can we protect gallbladder health? Along with this, intestinal health, how can we make our intestinal health more active? So let's also meet in the Zoom class to discuss in more detail topics such as which foods strengthen our intestinal health, which foods we should avoid so that we don't develop leaky gut syndrome, and similar subjects.